We're now witnessing changes that haven't been seen for more than a century, and we are pushing them together. Bidding farewell to Russia's Vladimir Putin, the Chinese President Xi Jinping concluded his two-day-long Moscow visit with these words. It was his first visit to Russia since the war began and also since his re-election. But those who are waiting a breakthrough for peace were left high and dry. Now here's what's happened in this crucial visit. On Monday, Xi Jinping received a pretty grand welcome at Moscow. The two leaders held some extensive conversations over the course of these 2 days. The talks ranged from the Russia-Ukraine war to criticizing the West and also the China-Russia no-limits partnership, which has now been cemented as a part of this visit by Xi Jinping. The West, for its part, was watching the summit very closely, hoping that China would not announce any kind of military support to Russia. And Xi did not. Rather, on the Ukraine question, this is what he had to say.
I would like to point out that in the Ukrainian settlement, we consistently follow the principles of the UN Charter and stand on an objective and unbiased position. We do actively promote reconciliation and resumption of talks. Our stance is based on the very essence of the matter and on the truth. We are always for peace and dialogue. We are firmly standing on the true side of history.
But what is this right side of history on which China says that it is firmly standing? Now, you may think that the right side is peace, but the question is this. Is China really standing for peace, or is this just lip service? Now, China did release a peace plan for Russia-Ukraine war. Its 12-point plan is pretty problematic on several levels. We'll get that in a moment, but first, listen to what Vladimir Putin has had to say about China's peace plan for the Ukraine war.
We believe that many of the provisions of the peace plan put forward by China are consonant with Russian approaches and can be taken as the basis for a peaceful settlement when they are ready for that in the West and in Kiev. However, so far, we see no such readiness from their side.
We are ready, but the West is not. Isn't really a very convenient thing for Putin to, of course, say for now. His forces are already in control of 20% of the Ukrainian territory. Now, at such a moment, the Chinese plan does not even begin to mandate Russia to pull back. In fact, it binds no one to anything. The vaguely worded plan does call for peace, and it also calls to end hostilities and to resolve the humanitarian crisis, but it does not lay any precondition for peace talks. If anything, it calls to reject the double standards right at its outset, and it urges the nations to abandon the Cold War mentality. Now, much of this was already the backbone of the Chinese narrative even before the war broke out in Ukraine. Xi and Putin, in a joint statement, also underlined that the security of any one state cannot come at the expense of the security of another state. The attack was on the US-led so-called Western Military Alliance, NATO. Now, for the new peace plan document, which Putin has, of course, welcomed, basically advances China's own narrative, and it appears at this moment to have very little in terms of concrete terms of how it can, in fact, put forth a plan to establish peace. So the question that needs to be asked is this. So what was the point of Xi Jinping, in fact, visiting Russia? Did he put forth a plan that is workable, or was this plan only meant to cement China's position much more firmly on the global stage? The economic powerhouse has in the past decade come in direct competition with the United States. The US naturally has reservations of its own with the rise of China. In recent years, the United States and the West have been somewhat successful in calling out China's potential wrong deeds, be it the issue of human rights abuses in Xinjiang, security and privacy issues with the Chinese firms, or the questions around the origins of COVID-19. So China has, of course, begun looking for means to make a credible comeback on the world stage. Earlier this month, Beijing had led a diplomatic coup of sorts in West Asia by brokering a historic deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Ukraine is obviously the next stop for China but Ukraine is going to be a completely different ballgame altogether. So the message of Xi Jinping's Moscow visit is clear: peace or no peace. China is back on the world stage, and Beijing wants to say that wants to say in the important decisions, and the United States and others cannot anymore dictate the world at its bidding. There's a new sheriff in town. That's pretty much the message that China wants to send forth. Now, to give us more perspective in terms of the significance of the Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, we're being joined by Professor David Dunn, who's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor Dunn, this was a crucial visit by Xi Jinping. He'd gone there with a peace proposal to try and, cool down the hostilities in Ukraine. But do you think he succeeded?
No, I don't think he succeeded. And in fact, actually, he didn't bring anything new to the peace plan that was published some days ago. What he did instead was he offered diplomatic support to Putin, who is internationally isolated and indicted by the International Criminal Court. And what he also did was establish the fact that in this new tighter relationship between Russia and China, that China is the dominant party. It was a way of indicating that to the world who are looking to this, because Russia now can sell its oil only illegally to those states that want to break sanctions, like China is doing, and therefore Russia is now the supplicant of China. And despite all the fanfare, all the glitz and bling of the meeting, that was clearly what was being demonstrated,
right.
that Russia has very few friends and China is now the main backer.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, what do you make of this no-limits partnership between Russia and China? Because with this now being in place and this being cemented, there's also the possibility that is now being spoken about of Chinese ammunition now entering into the Ukrainian war zone, which could be used by the Russians. There are already these images that are doing the rounds of Chinese drones that have been, altered and used by the Russians. Do you think more of these Chinese ammunitions could now come into play in the Ukraine war?
That is the concern that many observers have about this meeting. What China wants to do is to endorse Russia's claim to rebuild its empire, because China has ambitions to rebuild its own empire. The idea that everyone who speaks Chinese should be part of the Chinese empire mirrors the idea that everyone speaks Russian to be part of the Russian empire. And so China has a vested interest in seeing Russia trying to reclaim its empire in order to legitimize its own plans for Taiwan in a few years' time. There's a clear relationship as to what's going on here, and the Chinese are supporting the Russians financially in terms of buying their oil, and the suggestion is that they're supplying them with ammunitions, and the fear is that they will supply them with weapons in order to actually make good on their claims. What China and Russia have in common, apart from territorial and empire rebuilding, is the idea that they reject the idea of a rules-based international order as defined by the United Nations in 1945.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Dunn, for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
No problem.